are happy to collect for the Lottie Moon Christmas offering every December as a church. You saw it goes to the International Mission Board, and you're going to be hearing about that in the weeks to come. We just wanted to get it. We always do it beginning of December to give you time to begin praying. Like, we don't even have the online giving option set up yet, so even if you wanted to give online today, it's like we're just asking you to pray. Pray about what God would have you give, and if he would have you give to help people around the world come to know Jesus Christ as their Savior. If you do want to write a paper check, if you still use those, there are blue boxes there. You just put missions or LMCO or Lottie Moon. We'll figure it out. Put it in there, and we'll get it to the International Mission Board. But over the next 4 weeks, so 3 Sundays and either a Thursday or a Friday, depending on which service you come to, we're going to be looking at 4, I guess you call them themes of Advent. We're going to look at hope and joy and love and peace. These are all gifts that Jesus brought when he came 2,000 years ago to earth, and we give gifts to each other as a kind of our Christmas tradition, but we're going to explore the gifts that Jesus brought to us. And today we're going to start with hope, and whenever I talk about hope, the thing that comes to mind, and that I really probably, if you look back at sermons, I always use this illustration, is football. Pick on football fans like myself, right? So you may be a Ravens fan, and today you're like, I hope the Ravens beat the Steelers, right? Or you're a Cowboys fan like me, right? You're like, I hope the Cowboys make it to the NFC Championship game this year. I don't even want to say Super Bowl because that's like, a lot can happen. But hope in football is really just wishful thinking. Most rational, logical people understand that football is unpredictable. That, like, if your starting quarterback gets injured this week and he's out for the season, you're not going to the Super Bowl unless you're the Eagles a few years ago, which is mind-blowing. But here's what I've learned about hope. Humans are hardwired for hope. Like, it is very difficult to move forward in life, especially when times are tough, without hope. We have to have something that we can look to and say, that when that happens or when this happens, that will make me happy. That will make life better. But I came across a concept this week that I found very interesting, and it's this idea of lesser hopes. So there's greater hope and there's lesser hopes. Greater hope is hope that's placed in Jesus. Everything else is a lesser hope. And so I found a quote from an article written by a woman named Wendy Alsop. It's 10 years old, the article is, and so let me just read it to you and see what you think. Should this. Lesser hopes, even when realized, inevitably diminish over time. You get the husband, child, job, or president for which you had hoped, but it doesn't bring you what you hoped it would bring. At our core, we want rest and peace. We want shalom. We want things that ease our loneliness or stress. We want safety and security. So what we're going to talk about today is that hope placed in anything other than Jesus is misplaced hope. And we're going to look at a story that's 2,700 years old, or we're going to go back in time, 2,700 years, and consider the context that Isaiah in chapter 11 was prophesying to. And so let me tell you what was going on. In 2,700 years ago, God's people, the Israelites, were facing a threat of the Assyrians. The Assyrians were the world superpower at the time. They were big, they were strong, they were mean, they were mighty, and they were with their king. His name was Sennacherib. They were coming against God's people and saying, you guys need to come under our rule or face the consequences. Like, if you come under our rule, we'll give you all, they said, we're going to give you horses and we're going to give you all this stuff. You got to worship our gods and we'll take care of you. But don't you dare try and stay independent from us because we're going to take you over. And so you can imagine the fear that they felt, the uncertainty that they felt. You can imagine that there must have been people that were like, man, just get under their rule. We don't want to die. And yet, this is when the Lord gives a prophecy to Isaiah. without this prophecy, I think it's logical to consider that there could have been a majority if it was democratic. It wasn't. It was led by King Hezekiah. If it was democratic, there could have been a majority that rose up and said, no, just give in to them. We want to live. But into that context, a prophecy comes from Isaiah, from God through Isaiah, in Isaiah chapter 10, verses 33 and 34. I told you we're looking at Isaiah chapter 11, but 10, 33, and 34 are the introduction to chapter 11. So let me read it for you. It says this, "Behold, the Lord God of hosts will lop the boughs with terrifying power. The great in height will be hewn down, and the lofty will be brought low. He will cut down the thickets of the forest with an axe, and Lebanon will fall by the majestic one." This is a prophecy of the fall of Assyria. And if you consider the context I just shared with you, you're like, this is a prophecy saying, no, don't give in to them. Don't come under their rule. The majestic one is going to deliver you. And you know, the people at that time had a choice. Am I going to believe this? Am I going to place my hope in what God has said through the prophet Isaiah? Or am I going to still push and hope that we just come under the rule so we don't die? What am I going to place my hope in? And no matter what the Israelites in that time, we don't know what the specific individuals in Israel were doing, this prophecy came to pass in Isaiah's lifetime. You find the fulfillment of it in Isaiah chapter 36 and 37, and it says that in response to King Hezekiah's prayer, he was the king of Israel at the time, it says that the angel of the Lord was sent by God, and he killed 185,000 Assyrians. Not God made them all mighty and multiplied their army. They didn't do anything. The angel of the Lord came and took out the enemy. And then the king that was breathing out all these threats fled to Nineveh, right? Nineveh like Jonah, right? He fled to Nineveh, and in Nineveh, his sons killed him. It's a fascinating story that we could spend the whole time on, but that's not what we're here to talk about today. We're going to look at what comes next, but I want to give you our main point for today. I've already said it, and I don't know if you caught it. Our main point is this: hope in what God has said is never misplaced. Hope in what God has said is never misplaced. To say it another way, you will never be let down when you place your hope in God and what God has said. Even though your situation may be difficult, you may have no idea how God might do something or how you might do something with God's help. Doesn't matter. If God has said it, it will happen. It is not misplaced hope. All you have to do is remember this story that I just shared with you of God delivering his people in Isaiah chapter 36 and 37. You go back and read it. It's fascinating. But God doesn't just tell Isaiah about that immediate deliverance. He goes on and gives them an entire chapter 11 of things that do not happen in their lifetime. And you're like, why would he do that? Like, telling me that we're going to be delivered, that's enough. But what happens after they're delivered? Their hope is fulfilled, but then they also have something to continue to place their hope in. We're going to get three things today. And before we proceed, I need to give you a principle of interpreting biblical prophecy. And it's also a principle that you can see used in talking about the gift of prophecy in the New Testament by the Holy Spirit. But here's the principle. When a prophet receives the vision or the prophecy from God, they see it as like a mountain range. If you ever looked at a mountain range, you know that you may see different mountains, but when you're far away, you may not know the distance between those mountains. So you see one image, but you can get to that first mountain peak and then realize, wow, that other mountain is way behind this mountain, but it looked like they were next to each other. And so what that illustration helps us to see is that the prophet sees this thing and they report it, but even they don't know the timing of when the events will happen. But the good thing that we have 2,700 years later is we have the rest of Isaiah, which is going to help us, and we have the rest of the canon of Scripture, which is going to help us understand when these things in Isaiah chapter 11 either have taken place or will take place. All right. We're going to begin in Isaiah chapter 11, verse 1. Check this verse out. It says this: "There shall come forth a shoot from the stump of Jesse, and a branch from his roots shall bear fruit. So I walk my dog kind of on the same route. I have like 2 different ways I go from my house every day, morning, afternoon, evening. And there's one specific way I walk, and there was a tree that I would always hit my head on, like the branches, because it was low. And then all of a sudden, like 2 weeks ago, I'm walking, and the tree's gone. And there's this gigantic stump. Like the stump goes from the road all the way to the sidewalk. It's huge. I didn't even realize how big this tree was. I just knew it kept getting in my way. But there's this big stump, and it's cut out. And so if I were to look at that stump and say, you know what? I think one day that stump is going to regrow a branch, and it's going to be healthy again. You'd be like, you lost your mind. That's not how it works. It's hopeless. But here we read the stump of Jesse. Who's Jesse? Anybody know? David's father. Exactly. The stump of Jesse, you would think it would say the stump of David, but it says the stump of Jesse because that's how hopeless it is. They're not even using the name David because it's like it would make them sad. And so they say Jesse. The stump of Jesse, there's this telling us of a time when this line of David was so hopeless. It used to be like a healthy tree that produced kings and all, and now it's just a stump. We're like, there's no hope. But here we read, a shoot will come forth. Like, what does that mean? I can picture it in like nature, but what does it mean in this prophecy? And we'll keep reading in verse 2. It says, and the Spirit of the Lord shall rest upon him, the Spirit of wisdom and understanding, the Spirit of counsel and might, the Spirit of knowledge and the fear of the Lord. And his delight shall be in the fear of the Lord. Any of that sound familiar? As soon as I read it the first time, I was like, I know what that's talking about. In Luke chapter 4, Jesus says this, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me because he's anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor, liberty to the captives, recovering of sight to the blind, to set at liberty those who are oppressed, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. I'm like, that's talking about Jesus. 700 years after Isaiah gave this prophecy, the shoot came forth from the stump of Jesse. Look at the genealogies at the beginning of the genealogy at the beginning of Matthew's gospel. You'll see that this is what happened. Jesus is a descendant of Jesse, and we would say he's a descendant of David because now we don't have this hopeless thing saying Jesse. We say David. The Spirit of the Lord is upon him. His delight is in the fear of the Lord. And then he goes on to say at the end of verse 3, he shall not judge by what his eyes see or decide disputes by what his ears hear. But with righteousness he shall judge the poor and decide with equity for the meek of the earth. And he shall strike the earth with the rod of his mouth, and with the breath of his lips he shall kill the wicked. Righteousness shall be the belt of his waist, and faithfulness the belt of his loins. How awesome would it be to have a ruler or a leader or a president like that? It's amazing. But then we're like, this can't be a human. This can't be a leader today, because it says he decides disputes without using his ears or his eyes. And he's right. No human can make a right decision without looking. I mean, they can get lucky, but not over and over. They need to see the evidence. They need to hear witnesses, right? Maybe they need to see the video, and they're like, okay, I saw the video. That's what happened. They're at fault. It's their fault. They're guilty. Without that, it's like, I hope we're right? Because people can lie. You could lie on the stand. This person that is talking about doesn't need any of that, because this person is not just a person. This person is God. He doesn't need witnesses or evidence to make the right call. But now we have to ask the question that I brought up earlier. When will this take place? Which mountain peak are we talking about in these verses? So you say it's been partially fulfilled 2,000 years ago when Jesus was born in the line of David, in the line of Jesse. But Advent, which is what we're doing, this arrival of these things, is not just about looking back to the first coming of Christ. It's also about looking forward to the second coming of Christ. We're reminded that when he comes back, he will strike down the wicked and it will be perfectly justified. There will be no innocence taken. Everything he does will be right. So here's our first point. Christ's followers have the hope of a perfect king. The world has never seen a perfect king. There will never be a perfect president. Okay? You guys with me? In the last years, it's been obvious. But even if you look back, you're like, that one was good. He may have been good, but he wasn't perfect. It's not possible. Every president is a fallen man. When we go to an election, what we're doing is we're choosing the least bad. Right? There will never be a president worthy to carry our greatest hope. We must place our faith in Jesus, who will never let us down. You ever recommend someone to someone? You know what I'm saying? Like recommend, let me give you an example. A barber, right? Somebody moves in the area, like, hey, you know any good barbers? And you're like, yeah, I know this one, he does a really good job. But in the back of your head, you're like, I really hope they don't mess up their haircut, because if they mess up their haircut, that's kind of like on me because I recommended them. You know what I'm talking about? You don't have to do that with Jesus. You can recommend Jesus to everyone, and Jesus will never let them down. Because here's what it says. Righteousness is the belt of his waist, and faithfulness is the belt of his loins. He always does what's right, and he's always faithful. That cannot be said of any other ruler who has ever lived. Like they could be better than others in comparison, but in comparison to Jesus, we're all wicked. We're all fallen. All right, so we're just getting started. That's section 1. We got 2 more sections of things that we can hope in. And so look at verse 6 and 9. 6 to 9. It's gonna seem very like a marked change. It says this: the wolf shall dwell with the lamb, and the leopard shall lie down with the young goat. And the calf and the lion and the fattened calf together, and a little child shall lead them. The cow and the bear shall graze, their young shall lie down together, and the lion shall eat straw like the ox. The nursing child shall play over the hole of the cobra, and the weaned child shall put his hand on the adder's den. An adder is a type of snake. They shall not hurt or destroy in all my holy mountain, for the earth shall be full of the knowledge of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. Now, if you ever watch National Geographic, you know that this hasn't happened yet. It's obvious. Like, there's no debate on whether this has been fulfilled yet, right? What we see on National Geographic is fascinating videos of animals tearing into other animals. And we watch it and we're like, wow, that is something, right? That's what happens. There are not wolves and leopards and bears and lions lying down next to their prey. Right now, when a wolf sees its prey, its mouth waters. It does the same thing that my mouth does when someone at Texas Roadhouse brings me a country fried steak, right? That's what happens because that's food to them. We read of a child playing with a cobra. That doesn't happen today without things ending very badly. But what Isaiah is telling us is that there's coming a day, not just when there's a perfect king ruling, but when nature itself will experience fundamental changes. Vegetarian lions. Crazy, right? Like there's coming a day where you could pet a lion. Like when I'm tired, this is like literally what I do. Here's some like vulnerability. I have a dog that looks like a puppy, but she's 3 years old, and like she's like a perpetual puppy. And like when I want to take a nap, I go get my dog and I bring her up in my bed, and she'll lay there and be my pillow, and I'll sleep on her, my head on her for 30 minutes, and she won't move. Love my dog. I love doing that. There's coming a day when people can do that with a lion. It's mind-boggling. Most people just accept this idea that the animal kingdom is a violent place. But it won't always be that way. Like, I never even, thought about that. It's like I watch National Geographic and I see, like a lion demolish an antelope, and we're like, oh, that's fierce. But we don't like, at least me, I'm not like, oh, that lion needs to like go to jail. I think that when I hear about a person killing a person and it's murder, but like when animals do that to each other, it's like that's just what animals do. But that's not what animals always will do. It's crazy. There's coming a day when there's not just going to be peace between men, there will be perfect peace in all creation. So the question now is, when is this going to happen? Very easy question to answer, at least in a high level, because we have an almost identical prophecy at the end of Isaiah chapter 65, and it's from verse 17 and following. But verse 17 tells us when it's going to take place. Can we get that on the screen? It says, "For behold, I create new heavens and a new earth, and the former things shall not be remembered or come into mind." And then it goes on to say the same things about these animals. And so when is it going to happen? In the new heavens and the new earth. And so maybe this is not something you've thought about before, but this, before we even talk about that, this prophecy was given 2,700 years ago. Like, they maybe thought maybe it was going to be like 100 years from then or 1,000 years from then. But we're 2,700 years later. And so you're like, God, how is it helpful to tell someone about something that's going to happen at least 2,700 years in the future? Like, what good is that? Now, here's my answer. It's helpful when we understand that this will be the future experience of every follower of Jesus Christ. And in the Old Testament, you say every one of God's people. Like, when you die in redemptive history is irrelevant. 2 Peter 3, verse 8 talks about, and to God, 1,000 years is a day, and a day is 1,000 years. So if it takes 3,000 years, that's like 3 days if you do that, plug in those in the equation. It's like, all right, I gave you this prophecy 3 days later, 4 days later, we're there. You're getting to lay down with your lamb, right? Or lay down with your lion, right? We can already lay down with the lamb. They smell, but other than that. But this is where we spend eternity. Revelation chapter 21 tells us that this earth will pass away, and there's a new earth that's going to come into its place. It's going to be our eternal dwelling place. It's going to be a new Eden. And now I need you to just think of something like that's so fascinating to me. For the first time in human history, a child will experience Eden. You know why I'm saying that? Because Adam and Eve did not have children until after the fall. So there was no children, like we're reading about children here. There were no children in the Garden of Eden. There were no children that got to pet a lion without getting their hand bit off. But one day, there will be. It's fascinating. So here's our second point. Christ's followers have the hope of perfect peace in the new heavens and the new earth. Not just peace from each other, peace from our enemies, but listen, like peace where you can go surfing wherever you want, and there could be great white sharks, and you're like, oh, hey, how you doing? They ain't going to kill you. It's amazing. I don't know what they're going to eat. Plankton, something. Vegetarian sharks. Crazy. But there's another thing that's not in this text, but it's in the Bible, and it's the idea that not only is there going to be this, we have this hope of like experiential peace, like in the world outside of us, but there's also peace inside of us, internal peace. Like in this new heavens and the new earth, right? There's going to be no more of these things that plague us so seriously of anxiety. Things like depression, those things will not be anymore. But as we go from that, there's a verse here that I'm going to just tell you in advance before I read it. Verse 10 proves that this is talking about Jesus, without a doubt. And so let me read it. It says, in that day, the root of Jesse, who shall stand as a signal for the peoples, of him shall the nations inquire, and his resting place shall be glorious. I say it must be talking about Jesus because this person is, in verse 1, the shoot of Jesse, and in verse 10, the root of Jesse. How can you be before, like the source of him, and come after him unless you're Jesus? And you were there at creation, and you came to earth in the incarnation, which is what we celebrate at Christmas. It's only Jesus, and I don't even have to argue for this because all I have to do is quote Jesus in Revelation chapter 22, verse 16. It says this, I, Jesus, have sent my angel to testify to you about these things for the churches. I am the root and the descendant, which is the shoot of David, the bright and morning star. They don't talk about being the root of Jesse because that was in the bad times. Now they can say David because David is the guy, like the man for the Jewish people. So no more sad times, Jesse, David. But we have one more section which is going to give us two things we can place our hope in. I'm only going to talk about one because next week we're going to cover joy, and I'm going to be in Isaiah chapter 12, which goes with this text, and I'll pick up some of these things, but I don't have enough time to break this whole thing down today. So let's look at verse 11 to 16. It says this, in that day the Lord will extend his hand yet a second time to recover the remnant that remains of his people. From Assyria, from Egypt, from Pathros, from Cush, from Elam, from Shinar, from Hamath, and from the coastlands of the sea. He will raise a signal for the nations and assemble the banished of Israel and gather the dispersed of Judah from the four corners of the earth. The jealousy of Ephraim shall depart, and those who harass Judah shall be cut off. Ephraim shall not be jealous of Judah, and Judah shall not harass Ephraim. But they shall swoop down on the shoulders of the Philistines in the west, and together they shall plunder the people of the east. They shall put their hand against Edom and Moab, and the Ammonites shall obey them. And the Lord will utterly destroy the tongue of the sea of Egypt, and will wave his hand over the river with his scorching breath, and strike it into 7 channels, and he will lead people across in sandals. And there will be a highway from Assyria, from the remnant that remains of his people, as there was for Israel when they came up from the land of Egypt. Like I said, we don't have time to fully unpack this, but the two things we see here is this. There's coming a day when the nations are drawn to Christ. That's number one. And number two, when a remnant of the Jews return to God through faith in Jesus Christ. That section speaks of the uniting of the northern and southern kingdoms, which were divided not long after David died, but then also that there's not going to be any jealousy between them. And so as you consider this, we ask the question again, when is this to take place? When is this? Which mountain peak is this? And so since there's all this talk of them going to war against the Philistines and all that, we know it can't be the new heavens and the new earth when there's no war. It has to be before that. When before that? I don't have an answer for you, but before that. But it talks about this amazing thing, which I'll bring back up next week, this another greater exodus. When God does like the same thing again, but he's instead of here's a couple of differences. Like it's not going to be all the people; it's going to be the remnant of the people that come back to him. But like I said, I don't have time to get into that. But in the few minutes we have left, I want to focus on the phrase in verse 12. He will raise a signal for the nations. So I want you to picture someone shooting a flare gun. You know what that is? Like a flare gun is like it like shoots a star. And it like goes up in the sky and it's like a star. And the point is you like see it, it gets your attention. And so imagine you're long away, like long distance. And this flare gun goes off and you see it and you're like, something must be going on over there, right? You don't know what it's about, but you know something's going on. But here we're told in verse 10 that it's not just that they see it. It says the nations will inquire of him. And we know it's not just that they inquire of him, because in Romans chapter 15, he talks of this, and he adds in verse 12 that the Gentiles will hope in Christ. So not only will they see it, not only will they inquire of him, they will turn to him and place their hope in him. And when I say them, that's us, Gentiles. Unless you're Jewish, you're not a Gentile. But everybody else is a Gentile. So our last point for today is this. Christ followers have the hope that people of all nations will turn to Christ. And I didn't realize this fact until this week, but I came across like some church history stuff that says the greatest century for the advancement of Christianity in the history of centuries was the 20th century. I was like, I need to look that up because that sounds crazy. But that's what they say. That Christianity advanced more in the 20th century than it's ever advanced in all the other centuries. That's like the century right before our century. That's now. And so what happened was there's advancements in technology and transportation and all that money, all that stuff. And so missionaries were sent from the quote-unquote Christian places to the places that were unreached. And then they were reached. You saw it in the video earlier. And now there's people in those areas that have embraced the gospel, and then they go share the gospel with other people. We call those indigenous missionaries. And so that's kind of the strategy now. And so like IMB, when you give money to IMB, what they're doing is they try to focus on the unreached, unengaged people that have no access to the gospel, no one there to tell them about Jesus, and then they send someone there, but then the goal is not for them to stay there for the rest of their life. The goal is for them to be someone that shares the gospel so that those people go and take the gospel to their own people. They know the language, they know the culture, right? It's indigenous missions, indigenous church planning, all that stuff. It's amazing. But what I'm saying is like this is being fulfilled today. A signal is being raised for the nations. And it's been being raised for the nations, but if you say the 20th century is the greatest time of growth, by the way, except for, I think it's Australia, Canada, and Europe. They're all declining, and America's not far behind that. But the nations are being reached with the gospel. The signal is being raised today to the nations. And so here's why this matters. Our efforts in missions are not misguided. They're not in vain. Giving to Lottie Moon is not a waste of money. Praying for unreached people groups is not a waste of time. Giving your life as a missionary is not a wasted life. We have an opportunity, and you could even say a unique opportunity in redemptive history to be a part of seeing people's eternal destinies changed. And you could even be a part of it just by giving some money. It's amazing. Never in human history has there been such an opportunity. And I'm not saying that you are saving people by giving money. Jesus is saving people, but Jesus has chosen that the way people get saved is by people that believe the gospel going and sharing the gospel. Why he set it up that way, I can't answer that. But that's what he did. And so if there's no one to tell them, there's no preacher, Paul talks about that, there's got to be someone to go and share the gospel for people to hear the gospel. Otherwise, how will they know? So we got to stop. I know we talked about a lot. So what I want to do now is give you 3 questions to consider how you might apply all this stuff that we've talked about. We've talked about stuff from 2,700 years ago and stuff in the future and everywhere in between. A lot of stuff. 3 questions to consider. So I'm going to give them to you, but first I want you to scan the QR code so you can let us know how we can be praying for you. Let us know if there's ways that we can connect with you. And by the way, we do have a baptism next week scheduled, second service. And so if that's something you need to do, we would love to do that. I can meet with you. We have a baptism questionnaire, and we could baptize you next week. And so if you check that box, I'll reach out to you. But you got to hit submit. If you don't hit submit, you're going to be like, why didn't he contact me? The answer is because you didn't hit submit. So work on that. You can submit it. I'll remind you at the end. But the first question to consider is this: what role will I play in seeing the nations come to Christ? You heard earlier, and this has been talked about for a long time now, especially here, like you could pray, you can give, and you can go. There's a great opportunity right now to give, right? Every Christmas, there's an opportunity to give. I expect next Christmas, there'll be an opportunity to give. But you can pray. Right now, we have a specific missionary couple, the Thompsons. They serve in Brazil. You can get on their prayer newsletter and be praying for them. You can also be praying through something called, it's an email you can get called the Unreached of the Day, and they'll give you a different unreached people group every day that you can pray for. They'll give you things to pray for, what's needed, all that. But here is the one that you may not know what to do about, and it's the going. And so in the Thompsons update email, they shared that there is a IMB, International Mission Board, missions college, and it sounds, I say college because 3 days, so college in the last 3 days. But 3 days, and you can go, it's in Richmond, it's the local one. Like, there's other ones in Texas and stuff, but there's one in Richmond in January. It's 3 days, and it's $250, and it includes your food and your lodging. It's amazing. And so if you're like, man, I really want to go to that, I don't have money for that, but I believe God's called, talk to me. We'll figure it out. But I would love to have people from our church leave this church or even help lead our church to reach the nations and have an impact in ways other than giving and praying. Let's be a part of the going as well. All right. That's the first question. Second question. What am I placing my hope in? The alternative, negative way to ask that question is, what's been letting me down? What's been disappointing me in my life? Maybe it's having a certain dollar amount in your retirement and you see it go up and down and up and down, and your feelings go up and down and up and down. Maybe it's an opportunity for a new job. You're like, once I get this new job, then that will fulfill my deepest longings. Or a relationship, or a political party, or a leader in a political party. Right? All those things can be, they're not always good, but they can be good, but they will never satisfy your deepest longings. And if you expect them to satisfy your deepest longings, all they can do is let you down, because it's impossible for them to do that. And if you can identify what you're placing your hope in, what's disappointing you in your life, then the challenge is to transfer your hope to Jesus. And so an illustration I heard about this is like this. Whatever you're placing your hope in is like a rope. And you know, if you're holding on to a rope for more than like a minute, this is what's happening to your arms, because your arms are weak and you're shaking because you can't hold on for very long. But you're just trying to hold on. You're like, oh, I hope, right? And then you fall down and let it do it. But you're holding on to this rope, okay? You got to let go of this rope to grab on to the rope that's connected to Jesus and let him pull you up. And let him satisfy those deepest longings that he's given you. You transfer your hope from these lesser hopes, which can be good, to the greater hope that will never let you down.